State biologist, non-game area, and that's about all I remember, Kate. So,
Yeah, you did good.
yeah.
So I'm with the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources, but yeah, non-game bird biologist. And so, do you want me to go ahead and get started? Are you hearing me so far?
We're good.
Let's check if that's a good level.
Too loud.
Yes.
Some say it's too loud, so some say good. We might go down 10%. See, all right,
Well, we can try the TV speakers or whatever.
we can you talk just another sentence or two, Kate, and see?
Okay, yep, gonna talk about barn owls tonight. I'm getting over a virus, so if my voice sounds groggy, it's not for lack of enthusiasm. Just, bear with me. I guess it was a good night for a remote presentation, not a in-person one. But feel free to interrupt anytime if you need to adjust the technology. I certainly understand that. So,
Thank you. You may have muted yourself.
I don't think I do.
okay. All right, I think we're good now. So I was going to start off tonight by telling you guys a little bit about just barn owl natural history, and then I'll get to talking about our research and management that we have going on for the species in the state. Okay. So starting off with natural history, barn owls eat small mammals. They eat a lot of rodents, mostly mice and voles, and each owl generally eats about 4 rodents a night. And so if you've got a group of owls raising a family, a nest of barn owls could be getting rid of as much as 30 mice a night. And so they're generally just seen as a very beneficial species for that reason. And they swallow their prey whole, and so they end up regurgitating pellets of the parts of the mammals that aren't digestible, and we use that to actually help us find the barn owls. When we're looking through a barn, we look for these pellets on the floor of the barn, and you can see they're about 2 or 3 inches long, about 1 inch wide, and they're dark black generally. So barn owl habitat is open types of habitat. They like grassland, pasture, hay fields, and to a lesser extent they'll use cropland. And they also need a cavity to nest in that's near the open areas. And so the natural kinds of cavities they would use are trees, hollow trees, or rock shelters, like a rock shelter in a cliff. But we find them in lots of different kinds of man-made structures like haylofts, silos, any kind of cavity in a building. And so oftentimes when people call to report barn owls, they say they saw a huge owl, but it's the barn owl's personality that makes them seem big. They're really not a big bird. They only stand a little over 1 foot tall. Their wingspan is 3.5 or 4 feet, so that can make them look larger, but they only weigh 1 pound, 1.5 pounds, so not a real big bird. They're also a relatively short-lived raptor. A lot of raptors live upwards of 20 years, but barn owls only live 2 to 5 years. They have sort of a different life strategy than other raptors, and they're pretty nocturnal, even more so than some other owl species. They generally only come out at night. And a lot of times when I'm talking to folks about barn owls, trying to decide if they have seen a barn owl versus another species, I'll ask them if the bird did any hooting, because barn owls never hoot. They only like sounds that are very screechy and generally unpleasant. They're a really good bird to talk about around Halloween because they make a lot of really creepy noises. So I'm going to try playing one of their calls right now. You guys can let me know if you don't hear it.
Not yet.
You didn't hear it?
No.
Ah, darn, I shared the sound too. Okay, so you're not hearing like this wailing, stepping on a cat's tail type noise? Okay, well, so after the presentation, get onto Google and listen to some noises that barn owls make, because it's really neat. They make some really creepy, weird noises, and I'm not sure that I'm technologically savvy enough to make this work if I haven't already, but, okay, so when barn owls nest, they generally, in Kentucky, at least the bulk of the nest will start in March. And they'll incubate eggs for about a month, and then the young are in the nest for about 2 months before they learn to fly. And so there's lots of things that make barn owls really strange and weird in comparison to other birds. And one of those things is they don't build a nest. They just lay their eggs on a pile of old pellets that generally get pretty soft because they contain a lot of fur. And unlike other raptors, they can nest multiple times in a year. So most of the nests start in March, but honestly, some of them are already nesting in January, and we know of pairs that have nested 3 times in 1 year, just one nest right after the other. It seems like it's related to the mammal abundance. If they're in an area where there's just lots of mammals present year-round, like maybe a granary where there's always mice coming to spilt grain, then the birds will take advantage of that and they will just keep nesting. And another really unusual thing about them is they can have very large broods. The largest one we ever found in Kentucky had 11 nestlings in one nest. So that was a really big family. And that's really something to open up a nest box and find that many owls in one box. So another thing that makes barn owls really strange in comparison to other birds is in most birds, it's the male's job to be have the showy plumage and attract the mate. But in barn owls, there's been quite a bit of behavioral studies in them, and actually the females have the showier plumage, and they have more spots, and it's been found by some researchers that the more spots a female has, the more likely they are to be mated. So just another thing that makes barn owls strange, females with those spots attracting mates. So in Kentucky, a little bit of history just about the species and the numbers of the birds that we've had over time. We don't have a lot of information on how many barn owls were here before European settlers showed up, of course, but after Europeans settled, we probably had quite a few barn owls in the habitat that was opened up by development. And so by the time our good bird records came along via the book that was put out by Mengel in the 60s, he described them as a pretty common bird because most rural people were familiar with the birds and said that they had seen them around at some point or another. But by the time the 90s rolled around, the bird was rare and hard to find. And so what changed between the 60s and the 90s? Farming practices in Kentucky changed quite a bit. In the 60s, we had a lot of dairy farms in Kentucky. I guess that was the peak dairy farming activity in the state. And then dairy farming has slowed since then. A lot of those structures have been converted to other structure types. And dairy barns are very conducive to barn owls with the hay loft, and some of the nooks and crannies that those barns were built with were just good for having barn owl nest sites. But the newer types of barns that were built, and in general just a regular tobacco barn, is less conducive for barn owl nesting. And then the round bale hay machine came out in the 70s, and that allowed people to cut hay a lot more often, and that general degraded barn owl habitat because there's just less critters in the fields when the fields are mowed more often. And in general, farming practices have just become a lot cleaner. People like to keep fence rows cleaner than they used to, and farms tend to be much more cleaner when it comes to landscaping than they were in the 60s. And we've probably had some loss in cavity trees, older trees, over that period of time too. we've also been studying the role of contaminants in barn owl declines. So the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources started working with barn owls in the 90s. And one of the first things we tried, because it worked well for other raptor species to hack them or release young birds into the wild, that worked out really well for peregrine falcons during that same time period. So they thought, well, let's try it with barn owls. And they put some transmitters on those birds. And we found that that did not work well for barn owls. And so in 2005, we wrote our statewide action plan, which is a plan that designates certain species that we spend time working on because they've declined. And so we started, at that point, we listed the barn owl and started putting up nest boxes, hoping that would help barn owls. But we were disappointed to see those nest boxes sat empty for a few years. Didn't see a lot of progress with that, at least in the beginning. And so in 2010, we changed things up and started a more extensive project with barn owls. And so we thought the first thing that we need to do is just figure out where we still have barn owls in the state and, what kind of numbers we have and where the birds are. So in 2010, we started really trying to get the word out that we were looking for barn owls. We promoted on TV, newspaper, social media, everything we could, that we were looking for barn owls. And people called us, if they wanted to report their barn owls, and we would follow up on those reports. We checked all the nest boxes we knew of out there, and then as we found owls on the landscape, we would check nearby farms as we could get permission to go look in structures. And we learned a lot through the first inventory. That was when we learned that barn owls in Kentucky will nest 2 or 3 times a year. We didn't know that until then. And we learned that the species was still more rare than we expected. So we only found 26 nesting pairs in that first effort, and only 4 of them were in our nest boxes. And almost half of those nests failed that we found. They failed for different reasons. Raccoon predation was a big problem. Some of the nests failed as we found them, like this was a hollow tree that had been cut down, and the base was full of baby owls. And so somebody called in the nest when they found that. But we've got a lot of suitable barn owl habitat in Kentucky. In fact, about 38% of the state seems like it should be decent enough for barn owls. So we thought we should have a lot more than 26 pairs. So after that inventory, we kind of changed our outlook, and instead of just blindly putting up nest boxes where we thought it looked good, we just focused on finding owls and providing them nest boxes so that we could really maximize the survival of young in barn owl nests. So we had to work putting boxes on just about anything, anywhere we found barn owls. We did buildings, we put some on trees, put them on poles, built towers, and here's one in a elevated hunting blind. Barn owls love these elevated hunting blinds, and so we made it to where they could still hunt out of their blind, and the barn owls could use it at the same time. Put the boxes up in barns, and the one on the right here is a box that's inside of an old retired silo. Barn owls would like to nest inside those old silos, but their young would just be on the ground of the silo, and raccoons would just come in and eat the young every year. So we just simply got them off the ground so that raccoons couldn't predate. And then we did a lot more monitoring. We got a Nest Peeper Cam, which is a camera on an extendable pole that sends the image down to a monitor on the ground, so we could monitor the barn owls without bothering them too much. And we repeated that inventory 4 more times. And this is something we did once every 3 years because it was such an extensive effort, and we have a lot of other projects we work on. So once every 3 years, we went out and counted the owls, and each time we went out, we counted a bit more and a bit more until last year we actually counted, I think it was 137 nesting pairs and another 30 or so roosting birds that we didn't document as breeding, but did in fact see a bird there. So we felt like the nest boxes, the tactics we were using worked out pretty good. It seemed like it was helping the survival of the birds and allowing us to find more locations. As part of this, we checked a lot of the same locations over and over again so we could be sure that it was in fact a new pair of owls that showed up and not, just us finding locations that already existed that we missed before. So we put up a lot of nest boxes, 226 in fact, and we definitely found that some of the types were better than others. In fact, the next few slides are about this. So some of the better ideas we had were, of course, putting a box up in a barn, cutting a hole through the side so that raccoons have a hard time getting into it. And then, honestly, the best idea we ever had was these silo boxes. Like 90% of the silo boxes hosted owls. And so that was just, that was one of the better things we ever came up with. The tree boxes were not a good idea. They took a lot of effort, but they all ended up just totally destroyed by gray squirrels. There's something in plywood that gray squirrels find very attractive, and they would chew them and destroy them. And so we're just not big fans of squirrels, and we stopped putting nest boxes in trees as soon as we found that didn't work out. We even tried wrapping the boxes, the edges, in sheet metal, but still it was not a good idea. So we abandoned that tactic. And so over time, you can see these pie charts. The lighter blue is showing the proportion of nests that's in our nest boxes, and that went up over time. The green is natural nests, and the dark blue is other man-made structures like the hunting blinds, the barns, the attics, and grain bins and whatnot. And so last year we did, another statewide count, and this was the distribution of barn owls we found in the state. The bigger the dot on the map, the more barn owls were found in that county. And so you can see you guys you're in pretty rich barn owl country out there. From Owensboro south is pretty much the best part of the state for barn owls. And so alongside the nest box efforts, we had a number of other smaller projects that we worked on with barn owls, and one of them was banding nestlings. And so we banded about 250 nestlings over the last 12 years, and you can see the arrows pointing to the little aluminum band on the bird's legs. And we actually get a pretty good recovery rate on barn owls. It doesn't sound like a lot, but 5% is a pretty good recovery rate for banding a species of bird. And a lot of them were found just, a county or two over, but some of the band recoveries were really fantastic and interesting. Like we had a bird go to Nebraska in its first year. We had no idea barn owls went that far. Had another bird go into Indiana. That was somewhat more expected, but then one went down to Florida. So we've had some neat things we've learned out of the bands. And so that got us thinking that we really wanted to know more about where our young barn owls were going. And so we put transmitters out on a couple of young barn owls, and these were satellite transmitters that automatically send the location to the satellites where the bird is and bounces it back to a computer program where we can see where the bird's going. So we did this to 2 different birds out in Callaway County, and they wear it just like a little backpack, and they carry on with life just as they naturally would after you tag them. We put the transmitters on the birds when they were right at about fledging age. The first bird went east from Callaway County into Tennessee, moved about 110 miles, and then it got hit by a car and ended up in a guy's front yard in Tennessee who gave me a call. And so that was really neat to see where that bird went. It's a shame we didn't get to see it go a little further. The second bird had a different dispersal strategy. It sort of wandered in several directions from its nest site and kept kind of bouncing back towards the nest. Both of these birds were young females, so it's kind of interesting to see how they had different strategies. This bird moved further, although it didn't end up as far away in the end, moved 100 or 200 miles. It also ended up getting hit by a car. It's well known that barn owls have real trouble with vehicle collisions because they're low flyers. They fly low to hunt their prey, and so that puts them in the way of traffic. And so there's actually been several papers written on why that's probably a major problem for barn owl declines right there. But in any case, some of the things that we learned out of that are that our barn owls move faster than we thought. One of the birds flew 40 miles in one night. That was way more than we thought a barn owl could fly in one night. When you watch them fly over a field, they just look like they're moving so slow, so you wouldn't expect them to cover 40 miles. Of course, vehicle collisions are a problem for the birds, and then we decided these transmitters we put out were so expensive, but as time goes on, they're making smaller transmitters for cheaper, so we thought after that project that we'd wait for some smaller, cheaper transmitters to put out on more birds. Another thing we've been doing with barn owls is we've been collecting dead barn owls whenever we can find them and submitting them to the University of Kentucky Veterinary Diagnostic Lab for necropsy. And we were just looking for things in the owls that may be causing, chronic health issues or anything that we could pin a decline on. And one of the more interesting things that we found was that we found a lot of mouse poison in the owls. About a third of the birds had been exposed to mouse poison. And the most common one that we found was Brodifacoum, which is decon, commonly marketed as decon. And so that's a problem for the birds because it can flat out kill them if they get too high of a concentration of it, and it can make them just generally feel unwell and be more susceptible to things like getting hit by cars and getting into trouble. So that's something we're continuing to look at. And we've got some other projects we're still looking at the data from. We did a genetics project that's through Ohio State University, where we collected feathers from our nestlings, and several different states did this, and they're using it to look at how much the genes are exchanged between states. So how much are we sharing barn owls with a number of other states that participated in this project. And so that's another way of kind of looking at dispersal. Are our owls moving up to Ohio and vice versa? And we also have, since we have quite a bit of this data on monitoring for the last 12 years, we're doing an analysis with Murray State University where we're just picking apart the data even further to see what we can learn about where we did well versus where we didn't do so well on managing barn owls. And we're going to finish that later this year and probably put a paper out about it. And so people often ask me what they can do to help barn owls. And so some things you can do if you're interested is you can certainly let us know if you find a barn owl nest. I always encourage people to use mouse traps instead of rodenticides, and that's not just good for barn owls, but it's good for pretty much anything that preys on small mammals, including even pets around your house. It's just a safer thing for wildlife and pets to use mouse traps instead of rodenticide. And if you have a farm or any kind of property with barn owl habitat, then you can install a nest box if you want to. We only install nest boxes where there are barn owls that need a safer nest site, but you're welcome to put one up yourself if you're just interested, and there's nest box plans on our website for that. And then another way you can help out is by joining Kentucky Wild. And if you haven't heard of Kentucky Wild, it's a membership organization that allows members to get involved with the conservation of non-game wildlife in the state. The money that you pay for membership dues helps buy equipment for things like this barn owl project or our other non-game projects. And the members are invited to different events throughout the year, like we have a barn owl box build usually, and a event where we go out and check kestrel boxes using our peeper camera. And so if that's something you're interested in, you can Google Kentucky Wild and find our website. And so that was what I had to tell you guys today. Of course, this project took the help of a lot of different cooperators, just more than I could even fit on a page. And so we certainly appreciate those folks that have helped us out over the years. And as I'm taking questions, let me see if I can get these videos to work. These are some videos that we took via our peeper cam of nests, and they can be pretty neat to see inside the nest. So let me know if this doesn't work. Do you guys see the video moving?
Yes, we see.
Yes.
Okay, so this is a fledgling barn owl. It's probably the last one, the youngest bird that was in a nest. Its brothers and sisters have probably learned to fly already. This one's still in the nest and will fly any day now. But so this is the kind of thing that we're looking at. You see how this bird has just a little bit of fuzzy down still stuck to it. So we know that we're not looking at one of the adults. This is a fledgling. And usually we try to make it to the nest a little bit before this. I just wanted to show that one because it was such a nice video. But this is what we usually see when we're checking the nest. And these nestlings are about half grown. And we're trying to get a count of the nestlings. And so if you guys want to take a look and see if you can count how many birds you see in here. A lot of times you have to kind of watch because everybody's moving.
5, 6,
7. We're here to say 5, 6, 7, 7, 6.
Okay. So this one got recorded as a nest of 6 because we got these 3 tall ones in the back. There's these 2 very ambitious ones in the front. And then if you keep watching, oh, there's that 3rd little runt in the front on the left side. So that got recorded as a nest of 6. And that's usually this is about when we want to visit the nest to count. And it's a good age to ban them too. So anyways, does anybody have any questions?
I do. Over what period of time do they lay their clutch of eggs? I mean, how many days do they lay?
Did you hear the question?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
So the female lays an egg every other day until she's done laying, and they often lay 4 to 8 eggs. Like I said, on a few occasions we found more than 8 eggs. So it can take a couple of weeks to lay the whole clutch, and that most often starts in March, but it can happen any time of year.
Thank you.
Kate, are you aware of Frank Lyon down in southwest Logan County? He posts several times a week on Bird Kentucky his barn owls pictures.
Yes. Yeah, Frank is one of the nests that was counted with our project, and yeah, we've been working with him the whole time. He's pretty vocal about his, but yeah. A lot of the landowners are pretty secretive about their owls, very protective, don't want them disturbed too much. But we're very cautious and careful to protect people's privacy in this project. So if anybody does know of where there's barn owls and wants to report them, they don't have to worry that we'll tell everybody where their owls are or anything like that. Like the county map I showed is what we release publicly, so there's not even specific dots on the map there for people to look for. So what other questions do you guys have?
Where do you see the barn owl 10, 15, 20, 30 years from now? Are you optimistic? we get more people are destroying, building houses, destroying habitat, farming's changing for the negative is the way I see it, more clearing all the time, and, are you optimistic about the barn owl, down the road?
I am. Of all the species we have to work on, I'm feeling good about barn owls right now. We've made a lot of progress with them in the past 12 years, and I think as long as we keep the progress that's been made and maybe get up to 200, 250 nesting pairs, I think they're going to be okay. The rodenticide thing is something, to keep in mind, but there's been some changes in the marketing of rodenticides lately that seem like they've helped birds a little bit. So, I think that barn owls, as long as we keep working on them a bit, I think they're going to be okay. Although I see your point on being concerned in general about that. And honestly, it's the grassland songbirds that concern me more right now because they continue to decline. So.
Thank you.
Do other birds take over their nests sometimes?
Do other species of birds take over their nest?
Yes.
Fortunately, we will sometimes find things in the barn owl nest boxes that are not barn owls, but usually if the barn owls want the nest box, they can trump those other birds. For instance, kestrels will sometimes end up in the barn owl nest boxes, which we like those too, but the barn owls seem to boot them out if they really want the box. Starlings will end up in there, the barn owls will boot out starlings. Our nest boxes are very much so designed to appeal most to barn owls, and that seems to work out well. And we're putting them in places like, the inside wall of silos. There's not much else that wants to be there. Pigeons will end up in them sometimes, but the barn owls come in and eat the pigeons and take over the box when they want it, so that's nice.
Well, what is it about the nest boxes that you make that makes them attractive? I mean, size, hole, what?
The size of the hole is important. It's got enough space to fit, 6 or 8 young in there. That's important. And then it's the placement of it. Otherwise, just putting it in a place where mammals cannot get to it. If you can get it in a place where a raccoon cannot reach it, the barn owls seem to recognize that and move in. So.
Thank you. Yeah.
I want to go on record and say raccoons are a terrible predator. I'm overrun with raccoons. They get your bluebirds, your chickens, and they're a bad dude. Or they can be.
Yeah, the raccoons are bad for barn owls too, and a lot of native birds if there's just too many raccoons. So there's several of our landowners that are very enthusiastic about trapping raccoons, and honestly, raccoons are one of those species that just does a little bit too well, and what we've done to the landscape, so it doesn't bother me to see that. But I know what you mean.
Kate, I know that the great horned owl will eat other owls, and prey on them. Is that a problem, or is it just habitat differences, or are there any kind of avian predators you think of the barn owls too much?
Yes, great horned owls will prey on barn owls, and so that can be frustrating. But honestly, when it comes down to it, our goal with this project is to be creating so many young barn owls each year that they can withstand some great horned owl predation. And so, the raccoons, you can fix that problem. Great horned owls, we certainly don't want to interfere with them. And so we try to just have a lot of young barn owls coming out of our nest boxes each year to where if a few are eaten by great horned owls, it'll be okay.
Push for those 11.
One on the car deaths, I'm curious, can you describe the scenario at night, the most common car hit?
Yeah, I've in my time driving around at night doing barn owl research, I've almost hit a couple of them. Luckily, I've never hit one, but it's always, the birds are flying low. There's maybe a hayfield on each side of the road, and they're just, the way they fly, they just sort of drift slowly at maybe a height of 5 feet off the ground. So that way, when they see a mammal move in the grass, they can pounce on it quickly. And so it can be tough to avoid hitting them if they're out flying across the road. But yeah, so we try to just think about our placement of nest boxes whenever we can to keep them as far off the road as possible. And again, just have a lot of young barn owls created each year so that hopefully the ones that get hit by cars will be replaced, quickly. So they also like to perch on fence posts, wooden fence posts on the side of the road and hunt from them. And so that can be tricky too, because a lot of times the fence posts are right next to the road and it brings them right next to trouble. So,
And there was some Midwestern data, I think it's the Colorado Kansas Collective, that found about 60% of the necropsy studies were bullet pellets. Is it
in barn owls?
In general raptor, they collected general raptors in the Midwest,
Yeah.
four state collective, and it was surprising a number. 60% was a lot, I thought, for bullet pellet. Any data of people shooting barn owls?
I don't think there's probably a lot of barn owl shooting going on. I think my guess would be that study found it more in red-tailed hawks and red-shouldered hawks, things that are seen as predators of backyard chickens and things like that. There's a few different ways that raptors end up with lead pellets inside them. One is they're shot and they survive, or two is they eat something that contained lead. And so if an animal is hunted and, for instance, if somebody shoots a deer and then leaves the gut pile out to feed the raptors because they like to watch things come to it or whatever, there can be shrapnel in that gut pile. And when the birds come to eat it, they end up ingesting the shrapnel, and it can hang around for a while in their bodies. So yeah, that's an issue with raptors. I don't think there's as much of that going on with the barn owls. We certainly haven't found it in our necropsy study. We've not found any lead shrapnel or ingested, or we've not found any lead in our barn owl necropsy study. And we've looked at 100 birds, and we did look at lead in their blood and tissues too, just because that's such a common problem with other raptors. But we really didn't find much of that in the barn owls. So they're a little bit different. I think most landowners welcome them, and if they don't want them there, they're going to just maybe close off the nest site or something like that. They're probably not going to shoot them.
Kate, I wondered if other states in our region are doing similar studies, and if so, what are you seeing?
There are other states doing work with barn owls. A lot of states do it kind of like us, where it's a periodic thing because it takes a lot of time. Indiana does some work with them, and they found a little bit of an increase. I think maybe they might have had 40 nesting pairs or something statewide the last time they counted. There's been quite a bit of work done in Pennsylvania and down in Florida, and a lot out in California in the Napa Valley, where the birds are used for rodent control in the vineyards. And so, there's people working on barn owls. It's not necessarily as consistent as, some work with other birds. There's been, times where we've had a big meeting and all talked about barn owls and sort of had some projects that came out of it that were multi-state. But a lot of this that I talked about today was was pretty Kentucky based, and so it was a priority that we saw within our state, so it's a little bit unique to hear.
Do you have a sense that you're going to be able to continue for several years in the future? You know, funding is always an interesting question.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you, the last time we counted, when we counted over 130 nests, it was actually getting hard to keep up with counting all those birds, which is a wonderful problem to have, because most of this work is done by me and one other technician, and we drive all over the state checking on the birds. And so that was really nice to feel like it was almost too much. And so something that I'm thinking about is possibly trying to get, for the long term, a nonprofit going that helps to take care of Kentucky's barn owls on private lands, because it would be a really good role, I think, given the private land role in the whole process, to have a nonprofit handle it and have us fund the nonprofit along with donations from other groups, companies, and whatnot. And so that's something we're chewing on right now, but in the meantime, we certainly plan to continue the project ourselves. And so, the next time I come talk to you guys, I may be plugging a new NGO that's going to handle the work, but until then, we'll handle it with Fish and Wildlife. So,
Skipping topics to songbirds, can you name maybe the top 3 that have taken the biggest hit in the last couple of years in the data?
well, grassland birds are a big concern to bird biologists right now. And if you guys heard of that 3 billion birds lost paper, it really highlighted how numbers of grassland birds have dropped in the past, 60 years or so. And so some of the bigger ones you would find out your way would be grasshopper sparrow, Henslow sparrow, and dickcissel. Those birds are getting harder and harder to find. But we just revised our State Wildlife Action Plan this year, and the list of species that we plan to work on that goes along with that. And we decided that we were going to go ahead and start adding some common birds as long as their decline justified it. And some of the common birds we added that had declined 50% or more in the past 60 years were eastern meadowlark and field sparrow. And so those you don't necessarily think of being rare because you still see them, out and about, but they've declined a lot. And so we're starting to do some work on those too.
That sounds like it's about it. Again, thank you very much for the.
I'll talk to you guys some other time too, soon, I guess.
Take care.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank you.
thank you much, Kate.
Bye-bye.
We'll be disconnecting, thank you.
It's-